Hello and welcome to Chapter 5 of The Magic Lantern, and this chapter is called A Basement Zoo. Sandy had never felt as lost and helpless as she did in that moment of nausea and realization that her comfortable modern world had suddenly been replaced by this dark, noisy and smelly place. The scruffy, dirty boy who had appeared at her side looked at her as if she was some kind of freak. Sandy bent over, clutching her stomach, and threw up again. The boy patted her comfortingly on the back as she did so. "Thanks," Sandy managed to mutter as she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and stood shivering in the freezing, drizzly night, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Come on, we should get out of the cold," the boy said kindly and motioned for Sandy to follow him. The boy scampered up a lane to the left of the music hall entrance and disappeared through a door halfway up. It was the same door that Sandy had remembered entering the previous night. Then it had been empty. Now Sandy and the boy joined a constant babbling stream of people tramping up and down the spiral stairs. Sandy expected to go up as she had done the night before, but the boy led Sandy down, and at the bottom, new and even more pungent smells greeted them. The smelliness of this place just seemed to escalate. Albert, the 21st century Panopticon curator, had told them about this basement zoo, but she had never expected it to be quite like this. A large bird cage covered the wall to the left, from floor to ceiling and corner to corner, and the residents, a collection of macaws, minor birds and lovebirds, screeched, squawked and twittered as if vying for the attention of the dozen or so people crowded around them. The people were equally noisy, whistling and chattering at the birds whilst poking their fingers through the bars and trying to feed them sweets and nuts. While across the room, a group of girls giggled at their warped reflections in a wall of distorting mirrors. Their shrieks merged with the mellow. The first room led through an opening into another with a very motley collection of animals. A small bear, which cowered in the corner of its cage, absolutely terrified. A wild cat hissed at anyone who went close, a couple of lemurs who clung to a bare branch and stared at everyone who went by with terrified eyes. In the middle of it all was a star attraction, a huge Russian brown bear and a battle-scarred baboon, both of which squatted miserably in cages that were barely large enough for them to lie down in. Sandy instantly felt heartbroken, fresh tears welling in her eyes. This was awful and so cruel. How could anybody want to see this? How was this right? Yet the basement zoo was crammed with people who did. "Amazing, ain't they?" said the boy with a great deal of pride. "Yeah, amazing," Sandy replied sardonically. The boy didn't notice. "Aye, and the bear and the baboon, they got into each other's cage the other night and they nearly tore each other apart," he announced enthusiastically. "Tam said they had quite a job splitting them up. Mr. Pickard's having new cages built for them over there." The boy pointed to a room ahead which was blocked off from view by a curtain and a sign which read, "After their epic battle earlier this month which destroyed their cages, Bruin the Russian bear and the dog-faced baboon will soon be on view in their new accommodation." Sandy dearly hoped that the new accommodation would be considerably larger than what they currently had. When the boy had finished showing Sandy the bear and baboon, he led her through another archway and into the largest room yet, where crowds gathered around various tanks containing snapping alligators, shy turtles, lounging lizards and languishing pythons. Sandy shook her head. This was hell. And it was a hell crammed with happy, chattering people that flowed past the exhibits like a human river. Most of the mob, however, were at the very far end of this room. The last exhibit was so crowded that Sandy couldn't see what poor creature they were gawping at. The boy pushed his way through the crowd and joined a gang at the front. Sandy squeezed through behind him and was amazed to discover the object of this last and most popular of the exhibits was a pair of chimpanzees. Both were dressed in smart outfits, one in a shirt, bow tie, waistcoat, tailcoat, spats and a top hat. The other in a frilly pale blue dress, blue lace gloves and an unfeasibly large blue hat that wobbled on her head as she chatted back at the audience. A sign on the front of the cage announced the pair as Solomon, Darwin's missing link, and his wife, Betsy. These must be the chimps that Albert had told them about, she thought. Solomon was one of the resident ghosts in 2016. She stared at him in awe. However, it seemed that the scruffy boy had not dragged her here to see Solomon and Betsy, but to meet a raggle-taggle, grubby-faced group of urchins who crowded the front of the cage, teasing the chimps. "Come on, lads, I've got him," the boy said. They fought through the crowd to the back of the monkey house, where they entered a small room, lit by oil lamps and candles. The room contained a couple of worn-out old wing chairs and a small round stove. At the far side of the room, a bench covered with tools and broken bits of machinery stood the length of the wall. It was stuffy in this room, but mercifully not as smelly as the zoo. "Take a seat," said the boy. The gang of boys all turned at once and focused their attention on Sandy as she lowered herself cautiously into one of the chairs. A spring dug into her bottom. The boys all stared at her in awed silence. She could imagine what they must be thinking. She realised she must have looked very strange to them in her modern clothing, and judging by the way the boys all seemed to be fixated by her furry snow boots, she guessed they'd never seen anything quite like her before. How could they have? She was now starting to feel embarrassed under the intensity of their curious gaze. "You should have taken him straight up to the attic to join the other freaks. Look at his feet. That's no right," said the tallest and skinniest of the boys, with arms folded and a look of disgust. Sandy was mortified. He thought her furry boots were her feet. What an idiot! She would have laughed if she hadn't felt so hopelessly lost. "They're boots," she replied sulkily. The boys all ahed, nodding in unison. Then they continued to glare at her silently. "My name's Sandy McMillan," she said as she jumped up from the uncomfortable chair and extended a hand to the boy she had met in the street. There was a moment's pause, and the boy took her hand and shook it. "I'm Jamie Murray. This is my wee brother Robert. We call him Wee Bobby." A small, grubby, snot-faced boy about the same size as Sandy, with a face full of freckles and tousled brown hair, stepped forward and shook Sandy's hand. His hand was sticky. Sandy did not want to imagine why. "Andrew here's the oldest. He's 13, Jamie said, introducing the one who had thought her boots were her feet. He nodded but did not shake her hand. He glowered at her suspiciously from beneath a thick mop of tangled black hair. "This is Sam," Jamie continued. Sam was so different from the others. He was neat and looked relatively clean. His hair was cut and combed flat down on his head with some sort of grease. He smelt slightly floral. His clothes were clean and boots were polished, and his socks were neatly pulled up to his knees. His eyes, however, sparkled with mischief. "Hello," he said, and briefly squeezed Sandy's hand before firmly putting them in his pockets. "Charlie?" "Watcha," said the boy standing to the right of Sam, offering a small wave instead of a handshake. He was about the same size as Sam, and something about the way they stood together made Sandy think they were best of friends, though they looked very different. Sam was neat. Charlie was extra scruffy. He reminded her of the Artful Dodger in the musical Oliver. "This is Jimmy." A boy with a shock of red hair and a face full of freckles glanced at Sandy and muttered, "Hello," then stepped further back as if she was going to bite him. "Welcome to the gang. Say, that trick you did was quite something," Jamie said amongst a sea of enthusiastic nods. Trick? Sandy asked, puzzled. Aye, the way you appeared on the stage. There was a general mutter of agreement around the assembled group. How did you do that? Because you didn't use a trap and you didn't use smoke. Are you a real magician? Bobby asked with such awe in his eyes that Sandy felt terrible that she wasn't. No, I'm not a magician, and the way I must have seemed to magically appear was not a trick. In fact, I don't know what happened. All I know is 1 minute I was in an old theatre with my pals on a ghost hunt, and the next I'm here with you guys. Sandy blurted out, once again on the threshold of tears. It was all so confusing. She was a huge fan of science fiction and loved films and programmes about time travel. Until now, she had thought it would be the most exciting thing ever to be able to travel through time. But it wasn't exciting. It was awful. Very tentatively, and trying not to sound completely crazy, she added, I appear to have travelled back in time to your time. In the absence of any other explanation, she decided to just go for the truth. The boys stared at her, stunned. They all burst out laughing. Oh, that's a good one, said Jamie. Come on, we're not daft. And we won't tell anyone your secret. We just want to know how you did that trick. But that's the point. It's not a magic trick. I really have travelled from the future, from 2016. I mean, look at my clothing. When have you ever seen clothing like this? You see all sorts in here, especially in the music hall and freak show. Could be just a costume, said Charlie. I saw a turn once who wore really long boots. They was longer than he was tall, and he walked on them like there was stilts, said Andrew. Aye, I mind him. He was funny, added Sam. Look, I promise you this isn't a costume. It's my clothes. And I'm not a magician. I really am from the future. I live in a tower block in Thornley Bank with my mum, who works night shift packing shelves in a supermarket. The boys looked sceptical. Charlie broke the silence. What's packing shelves? What's a supermarket? Asked Sam. Aye, what's a tower block? Asked Andrew. A supermarket is a big shop where you can buy food and stuff. My mum makes sure the shelves are full of food. And a tower block is a really tall building with hundreds of flats. Hundreds of flats? Queried Bobby. Sandy nodded in response. Yep. How tall? Asked Sam. 22 floors, said Sandy. Sounds made up to me, said Andrew. I ain't never heard of no supermarket, and there is no such thing as a building which is 22 floors high. Why, that's even taller than the Toll Booth Tower. Well, in the future, where I come from, buildings are really tall. Supermarkets are everywhere, said Sandy defensively. Threatening tears were hot at the back of her eyes, but she wasn't going to give in to them. They didn't believe her. That was obvious, and they, like Mr. Pickard, seemed to assume she was a boy. Should she tell them she was a girl? Women in the costume drama she had watched with her gran always got treated worse than men. Maybe she was safer as a boy. Getting back home was her only priority, and she would probably need help from this little gang. They're all she had, and she needed to convince them that she was telling the truth. The only proof she had were her clothes and her mobile phone, which she knew from her 21st century science fiction TV diet could change the course of history and rewrite time completely, but she had to show them some sort of irrefutable proof. She looked at the curious, grubby faces. You all have to swear the most awesome swear ever that you will never tell a living soul about what you're about to see. If you tell anyone, it might change the whole course of history, and I kind of like my world the way it is. Do you all swear? She asked. Each boy looked at the others, and they all nodded in agreement. Sandy put her hand in her right pocket and closed her fingers around her phone. Should she show them this? She knew that the telephone had been invented. She had seen one in a small office in the music hall, but she knew they certainly wouldn't have seen anything like her touchscreen smartphone. She wondered what they would make of it. She knew she couldn't call anyone, but she did have loads of videos and pictures stored on it. You've all seen films, yeah? She asked. The boys looked at her blankly. Sandy had seen a film playing in a music hall earlier, so she knew they had, movies, moving pictures. Oh, the flickers. Aye, said Charlie. Well, in the future, we carry the flickers in our pockets, she said, pulling out the mobile phone. The boys gasped when they saw the small, smooth, black rectangular piece of plastic. And when Sandy unlocked it, the black rectangle came into glorious full-colour life with a picture of her white poodle, Casper. The boys gathered closer, each dirty, reverential face illuminated in the glow of the small screen. After a moment of astounded silence, Sandy slid Casper up, revealing her icon-filled home screen, and tapped the film icon, which pulled up her video menu. She selected Christina Aguilera's Candyman. It was the most vintage tune that she had. Tapped play and the video burst into life. It was like a vibrant Technicolor window into the 21st century. Sandy turned the volume up and the boys gathered closer. They looked ready to faint in their amazement or run in fear. But they were all frozen to the spot. Every jaw dropped and every pair of eyes popped. They were mesmerized and half terrified of the fast-moving music video. When it finished, they stood soundlessly stunned, staring at the screen until Sandy locked the phone and it went black. It was as if she were a hypnotist, clicking her fingers and bringing the boys out of a trance. Jings, those women, you must really be from the future, all right, Jamie said, his face and voice full of awe. I could never, how can that be? How can you have all those people and that music in that little black slate thing? Where's the projector? What are they wearing? Asked Sam and Charlie in unison. What are they no wearing, more like? Mumbled Jimmy from the back. Sandy laughed. Fashion and technology are way more advanced in my time. We have our own screens in our houses, which we watch thousands of different films and programs on. This, she indicated her phone, isn't even really for watching films on. It's really a phone. A what? Asked Andrew. A phone, a telephone. You use it to call people? Sandy said. The boys looked totally bemused. You do know what a telephone is? Asked Sandy. A telephone? Aye, a bell? Mr. Pickard has one in his office, but I never used one, said Jamie. Well, this is the bell of the future. We call them mobiles because you can walk around with them. We use them for loads of stuff, texting, chatting, surfing the net, downloading films and music, taking pictures and video. Look, I'll show you, she said, and started to corral the confused gang into one group. Now show me your best can. They didn't move. They just looked at her bemused. Sandy started high kicking, then encouraged them to do the same. They started kicking their legs up in the air and Sandy filmed them. When she played the footage back, the boys still seemed terrified. So she played it again, and the fear of the unknown melted away as the boys began to chatter, laugh, and then excitedly talk about who they had to show this to. You all swore you wouldn't tell anyone. You can't. You mustn't. If adults got to hear about this... The door suddenly burst open and a harassed-looking young man in a peaked cap with a fuzzy moustache stormed in yelling, "Where the bloody hell is he, Jamie? Where's Tam?" The angry invader didn't even notice Sandy. "I've no idea. He was about earlier. I saw him. He was working a magic lantern," Jamie replied. "Aye, well, he's not at the magic lantern now, and he left his post before the end of the show. Mr. P is on the warpath. They're letting in for the next show already and Tam's nowhere to be seen," the vexed man said as he impatiently turned and stormed back out, slamming the door behind him. "That was Harry. He's a zookeeper. His dad's the handyman here," Jamie explained to Sandy. "Tam's my brother. I guess he's done one of his famous vanishing acts." "Aye, he's good at that," added Bobby. Jimmy, who was still staring at Sandy as if she were from another planet, piped up, "If you're from the future, How did you get here? I don't know, she said. I think the magic lantern brought me back here. But I thought you said it wasn't a trick, said Sam. It wasn't a trick, Sandy replied. All I can tell you is there was a magic lantern where I was before I came here. I'm not sure exactly how it happened. All I know is it switched on and I was suddenly staring into this bright light, and then I was falling. I thought I must have been falling through the floorboards, but I must have been falling through time. If you stare at the magic lantern light again, will you go back to your own time? Asked Andrew. She shrugged. I certainly hope so. Surely it had to be the way back. She couldn't bear thinking about the rest of her life spent here, in this stinking place, without TV, computers, mobile phones, social media and the internet. Oh, the horror. Mr. Pickard only got that magic lantern recently, said Jamie, thoughtfully. Do you know where he got it from? Asked Sandy. Jamie shrugged. Aye, Tam says he got it from an auction. Mr. P is always buying stuff from auctions. Maybe it belonged to a really powerful magician and it has a time-travelling spell on it, Bobby suggested. I want to have a go. Let's see if we can all travel through time. Aye, that's a great idea. Let's all have a go, said Charlie, grinning eagerly at Sandy. Sandy thought it was a very bad idea. She had travelled through the beam and ended up here. Where would the boys end up? Where would she end up? I don't think anyone should try it, and I don't think it's magic, not real magic. Real magic doesn't exist. Everything has a logical explanation. So what's the logical explanation then? Asked a puzzled-looking Andrew. That was a very good question. Maybe it's a ghost, said Sam. You did say you were doing a ghost hunt. Well, when the music hall closes, why don't we go and find out? Suggested Jamie. Well, that's it for chapter 5. I hope you enjoyed it. Join us again on the 4th of April for chapter 6.